Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Carlos Moncada, and I'm Director of Client Services here at InfoReady. We welcome you to a Peer Spotlight webinar today with our panelist, Dr. Joshua Roney from the University of Central Florida. Josh is Associate Director of Research Development there, and he's going to be talking about the topic here, scaling your research enterprise without fear. So he's got lots of interesting things to share with you today, best practices and tips, and also just going over different parts of the process for how UCF adopted InfoReady, the before and after, and everything in between. So I am going to go over a few of the logistics today for the webinar. So we're scheduled for 60 minutes. About 20 to 30 minutes of that is going to be for presentation. The remainder of the time will be Q&A with Dr. Roney. So those will be both questions submitted in advance and also questions submitted through the Q&A option here in the Zoom tool. Your phones are muted, and therefore, please do submit questions in that Q&A tool. The webinar today is being recorded. So if you wanted to revisit the webinar, or if you wanted to share it with any of your colleagues who were unable to attend, we'll make sure to share a link to the recording here in the next week or so after we make some edits. Also, throughout the webinar, you may see a few poll questions pop up. It'd be great if you replied to those. There's only like 3 or 4 and quick one-click answers. So with the logistics out of the way, I will turn you over to Dr. Joshua Roney. Josh, take it away.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the great introduction and for inviting me to share with you all today. I am happy to speak a little bit about our experience with InfoReady and scaling our research enterprise. We have definitely gone through some changes in the last few years, and I'm happy to give you an overview of some of those things and address questions along the way. Next slide. So a little bit of context. The University of Central Florida is a high research institution located in Orlando, Central Florida. We are one of the largest campuses in the country. We have about 72,000 students. We are a Hispanic serving institution, and about 48% of our entire student body are from minority groups, and specifically we are 27.5% Hispanic serving. And so we do have that official designation, and that's a focus in how we support our students and faculty. Speaking of faculty, we have, as you'll see there, a little less than 2,000 faculty members, 1,890 full-time equivalent, and then a smaller number of part-time or special appointments. As I mentioned, we're a high research activity, both in the number of proposals we submit and the amount of funding that we draw from. We seek funding from private donors, but also from private foundations, from federal grant agencies, state and international funding organizations. On the right side of the screen, you'll see we've definitely grown quite a bit. In just the last decade or so, you'll see our research enterprise in 2010, for example, was 130. And this past year, we closed at 212.9 million in research funding. And that dramatic increase is the result of a lot of strategic investment by the leadership at the university and a lot of really great minds proposing excellent ideas and becoming increasingly aggressive about seeking funding. And our team, the research development team in the Office of Research at UCF, we are a part of supporting that larger effort. Next slide. So our team, we're called Research Development. As I said, we're centralized. We support faculty at all levels and all departments across the university with specific support that is not provided in their existing research administration infrastructure. So that means that we are helping researchers with things like this list here. We're coordinating workshops throughout the year. We do between 30 and 50 workshops a year where we invite speakers, experts, panelists to provide advice and overviews and recommendations for pursuing funding. We provide direct search support when people are seeking funding opportunities, and we are one of the touch points for funding search tools, which has relevance to today's talk. A search tool that we use at our university that we have for a long time is the Pivot ProQuest funding database that we integrate with InfoReady with our use for limited submissions. We help researchers connect with one another. We are a distributed university at many different locations, and it's difficult sometimes to find good matches as you're developing teams or seeking mentors or reviewers. And so our team helps to support identifying those people and connecting them. We also are a big interest of ours is making sure that we are aware of tools and resources that can support the proposal development process. This can be information sources, internal or external to the university, things that can streamline the development process or improve quality control measures, and even things that are more qualitative, where we have strong sample proposals that can be recruited and utilized in proposal preparation. We provide a lot of proposal direct support and in review. My particular background is in technical communication. And so I read proposals for many faculty members and provide non-technical feedback and advice on proposals. We have peer review on campus and peer review externally that we coordinate with our system. And we also, more focused to this conversation today, we oversee and coordinate the limited submissions program at the university and coordinate a number of UCF internal programs open to the faculty at the university. And I'll give a little bit more information on that in the next slide. So for context, limited submissions has definitely gone through a dramatic change in the past 5-6 years. It is a process at our institution. The philosophy and process at UCF is that everyone who has an interest in submitting to a program can have a shot at submitting to it. And the way we can coordinate that equitably is that we have an internal program where a notice of intent that is optional is requested of reviewers, of applicants, to see if they can share their topic area, and we can aid in coordinating review. And then we have a internal white paper competition that is required. And in that process, from there, we would coordinate internal review from an internal technical panel across UCF. These reviews are developed ad hoc each time we don't have a standing panel, so that we can have the strongest technical feedback and the strongest proposals proceed forward. Now, our process prior to using InfoReady and how it had been since before I started with UCF, which was in 2010, before that and until 2018, our process was doing all of this through some manual systems. We would have a staff member who is specifically designated focusing on limited submission coordination aspects. The things of announcing opportunities, collecting applications, correspondence with reviewers, intended applicants, results information, generating forms and getting data into and out of forms related to limited submission review. This process was extremely labor intensive. And what we found over the period of time between when I started and in 2018 was that this sort of approach, even if the limited submission approach is in the best interest of reviewers, the way it was coordinated manually was not in the best interest of the people who had to coordinate it. And what I mean by that is it definitely contributed to a burnout tendency, because if there is a person whose responsibility is coordinating everything effectively, and then the process to communicate with them is email, then that person is incentivized to check their email often and even off hours and continue to do work beyond the scope of a workday, which is not healthy and not something that we would support, but it became something that we would see slowly build in terms of the stress of coordinating all of these pieces together. And we experienced sequence over the years of people who would learn the system and do a great job at it and be well equipped to do it in terms of their skill set and backup support from our team, but would eventually get to the point where it was just not something they enjoyed doing and were feeling the beginnings of burnout on it. And they would end up moving to a different position and we would repeat the process. So that's not a good process to support limited submissions. And we were looking for a solution and we came across InfoReady as a solution there. In 2018, we adopted InfoReady as a solution specifically to support our limited submissions program as it existed in my description just then. So optional notices of intent, a white paper submission, and an internal competition if the number of submissions was over the limit allowed by the funding agency. Just to support that, we put the InfoReady in place for that, and we immediately saw an improvement in a number of areas. We saw that we were able to post the opportunities right there in one place. And so people could submit only there. We were able to say, this is due by this day and enforce that rule very effectively because the portal can close after that time. And so that allowed us to hold quality control on the application side effectively. Our ability to have required fields allowed us to save time on what we were collecting from people on notices of intent and white papers so that they provided what was required in the forms instead of some of the things that would then have to be tracked down if it was omitted in an email attachment or an email correspondence. So we were able to save time in that side. And we were able to keep everything locally, so to speak, within the system so that the proposals could stay there, the administrator and backup could see it through there. And we could route review and correspondence within the system as much as possible. And so as we adopted it, we saw, as I said, we saw we were able to breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief that the system was able to support our plan for running limited submissions the way we do here, but relieves some of those efficiency problems and some of those overwhelming correspondence problems that were native to the system. We were able to adopt a team-managed limited submission email address, in fact, and no longer tell people who the point of contact, the singular point of contact is. We refer them to the portal and to the limited submissions email address, and our team can cover that with the lead person handling this so that people continue to work within the system and don't go back to an older way of doing things. As we continue to use it since then, it's been a few years now, and the system has definitely improved, and we've improved in our process based on how the system can run things. We use the single sign-in option. As I said, we use Pivot ProQuest's push to InfoReady option where we can pull in the opportunities directly in that would qualify for limited submissions. We were able to do more tracking on the fly during competitions and even prior to submission deadlines to see activity that were going into individual limited submissions and adjust accordingly, where we were able to not able to do that prior, because before, if we're using an Excel sheet and an email series of folders managing that, it becomes incredibly labor intensive to basically ad hoc create a dashboard for every competition. So this provided one place where we were able to do that. And we saw from the person who was handling the limit submissions at that time, they were in that place before we adopted the solution, doing the manual step, and then continued to use it during its initial startup stages. So they saw both sides of it, and they voiced a great appreciation for the system, even though some of their day-to-day pieces had to change, because now they're, instead of sending emails, they're sending things into the system. that it made things a whole lot easier for them. So we were able to do that. And we were also able to standardize a little bit more of our review processes in using a standard template for types of competitions. So for example, the National Science Foundation has certain evaluation criteria on all programs with specialized ones for that program. We were able to develop templates that imported those things to save a step and make sure that that was established in those competitions. We also adopted a naming system so that we could organize our opportunities in a way that people could find them. So as I said, we were able to do more analysis, do more reporting possibilities. We were able to look at how have our trends in submissions gone up or gone down, or stayed flat for particular competitions or overall. And we found that over the last few years, both the number of funding opportunities that are limited submissions and the number of faculty members who are interested in pursuing them have both gone up. So more people are looking for funding and more funding is limited, which has required a greater amount of coordination, definitely. And the system has allowed us to support that without having to expand our staff all of a sudden to handle the additional coordination. So the system has allowed us to continue to grow with this type of competition and not have that burnout possibility, or at least the lower potential for that. But as we were using limited submissions in this way, and as I said in a previous slide, since our team is supporting some internal programs, at the time, in 2019, we said, well, can we use this for some internal programs as well, that right now we're coordinating in a similar manual process. And so if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So internal programs before involved a whole lot of hard copy documents, people creating binded packets of things that panel reviewers would mark up and handle, in addition to the emails and the documents that would have to be handled manually. And those, especially in internal programs, those are often very short turnaround between application and the beginning of the proposed work. So the timetable for those were incredibly crucial, just like they would be in limited submissions. And so we saw, as we tried to map those into there, that we were able to similarly improve the way that we handle our internal programs, both in time savings and in efficiency in coordinating the post-submission review. As we did the early adoption, we did the same thing we did for limited submissions, where we tried to do a one-for-one transition from the way we had done it in hard copy and email to the way the system would allow us to do it. And we saw, as I said, those gains, but then quickly we realized that things like the required form fields and making uploads optional and the ability to push back applications for changes on the PI side made us look at the competitions for places where we could make them more efficient and more effective. And it was a success, and it continued to lead to more and more internal programs going into the system. This was important because part of the internal program's scope is they have specific things that they're trying to support, and reports were possible because the system allowed us to aggregate that data and pull it much more easily. If you could go to the next slide, I'll give you a little bit more detail on this. So we started with an infrared with just a couple of programs. We had just one or two programs that we put in there that were obvious to fit, but since 2019, we've added up to a dozen different programs with very specific scope and deadlines throughout the year. So in addition to those limited submissions, we now put many internal programs into there. The programs that we've put in, some have smaller application pools where there's maybe a dozen people interested, and others have many times more in some cases. But you'll see here, the way we use the system right now for internal programs, and this is a different coordinator, and actually a couple of people from our team that are owning particular competitions. We were able to support seed funding efforts that were in a couple of different tracks. The mentoring programs, facilitating individual support, postdoctoral funding. The things that we would do with the scope in our internal programs, just for context on here, these were developed in a way that would be in response to the needs identified across the university. So faculty survey, faculty recommendations from different leadership groups about things that would help support our goal to grow as a research institution in various ways in our strategic plan. And so as new things came up as initiatives that were important or opportunities that could be supported, a question would emerge in the Office of Research that said, okay, we have a potential to support this sort of initiative. Is this something that we can coordinate? Do we have a bandwidth to do so? And InfoReady has really allowed us to do that. We've seen in supporting these things significant impact in some of the measures that we have been tracking. So we see faculty members' research skills, especially early career researchers, they are getting benefits from being able to be involved in the program. Increases in external funding that were part of the scope of some of our internal programs. We've been able to see through a number of our internal programs, as you'll see in these various bullets here, trying to improve the external submission count, the preparation steps, the teaming, and the support across the university. And so this continues to grow and does continue to grow. And what we found that was an interesting thing was a lot of these programs were housed through the Office of Research exclusively. And the Vice President for Research, the Associate Vice President for Research, who I report to, they would have initiatives that would be started and run through the Office of Research. But as it continued to grow and be able to be seen as a system that could support that, we began to get connected to other areas in the university to support their faculty engagement. So we were able to work with some academic excellence offices in the university that were supporting researchers in their particular programs. And we were able to serve as a contact point, but able to support a co-coordination of those efforts. So it continued to grow a bit more. And then, as I've alluded to in some of the scale, we've had growing numbers and current applicants. We had a significant program that I have on the next slide that I'd like to mention here. The VPR Seed Funding Program, which I mentioned by name a few minutes ago, but I wanted to give a little bit more attention to. You'll see there, the scope is listed at the top. These are investing in researchers and great ideas that can lead to future funding and teams that can go after funding that requires specific interdisciplinary team efforts. And we, in the first program, first year of that program, there was a $1 million investment with another amount voluntarily matched through the different units on campus to enhance the research. That amount was matched again in the second year, and we just recently announced our third round of that program. So $1 million of funding going to researchers. That is, from a faculty perspective or researcher perspective, is a great opportunity to pitch something that is a far less competitive pool because you're competing against your peers at one institution rather than at a national scale. With many federal opportunities. And because of that, we got a significant number of applications to every track of this program, every year of this program. Through the efforts of this particular program and its various tracks, we've been able to support in the first year 30 awards, in the second year 37 awards. We'll see on the third round. This equates to 130 faculty who benefited directly from funding in this program. But you'll see there, we had 4 times as many applications each year. And the review process that goes into this is a multi-stage that involves both a multiple reviewer technical review and a unit recommendation stage review and a panel review for recommendations. So a multi-stage review that has different sorts of things being looked at for these different things. And this was an incredibly complicated effort that we really would not have been able to do successfully without the support of the system because of so many moving parts in order to run this at the level that we wanted to run this program, so that it had the quality review, that it had the level of impact and involvement across the university. So this was a big scale up that we were able to do with the system. Because this one was successful and it is continuing to be successfully supported through the system. If you go to the next slide. Oh, and before I go, if you could go back one slide real quick. Carlos, am I supposed to answer the Q&A that came back just now?
We'll save that for the end. Okay,
thank you. Okay, then next slide, please. Okay, so there is an initiative that we are in the middle of right now, the UCF President's Strategic Investment Program, which is a $30 million effort with up to another $20 million in match funding across the university for significant investment in areas across the university to continue to further its goals. This has gone into 3 individual tracks. You'll see there one-time projects that can be any scope and involve faculty or staff. So these can be investment in infrastructure, in facilities, particular projects, a very wide gamut of opportunities there. And where the second track is focused more on academic excellence, and the third is focused on student success. In each of these areas, there were more than 60 applications submitted. And these were running at the same time with separate review panels, separate review criteria. And so we are, as I said, we're in the middle of this. We've completed the Jumpstart Award pieces of it, and the other 2 are going through final review right now. But so many moving parts in here. And then this one was a partnership with the president's and provost's offices at the university, who were involved at a coordination level, at a guidelines advisement level, and review levels. And so we were able to partner with them in this to make sure it was run the way that they wanted it to be run, and in as efficient a way as possible. The program was announced earlier this fall and should be concluded in all of its coordinating activities in the very near future. And so this effort was one that we're very proud of, that we were able to support so that so many people could be benefiting from this effort. Again, we don't have specific numbers on all of the awards yet, but the variety of applications and the variety of pieces that went into this definitely made this a significant challenge that we were able to support. The program without using InfoReady would have been delayed because they didn't have a different solution ready that could support it at the scale they were hoping to do. And so we were able to partner in order to let this happen at the timetable they were hoping to do. So we were really happy to be able to support that. Next slide. Okay, so in just a few summation points, what could we do with InfoReady? We were able to simplify our application processes. Instead of having emails that bounce back and forth and forms that had to be developed and filled out and then pulled out of information into other forms, it was a much simpler process for applicants. It's a much simpler and better quality control process for our reviewers who can fill these things out on mobile devices. We have a question here. I will keep talking over the question. And we were able to, as I said, improve our review processes for limited submissions and these various programs to make sure that review quality was there, consistency was there. In terms of what we collect and review, I didn't mention this earlier, but in all of these aspects, we collect both qualitative and quantitative review data. So scoring that is specific and appropriate to the program, but also qualified with comments. And the system was supported our ability to do that and its reporting functions as well. We were able to better enforce rules and quality control measures. So reminders to delinquent reviewers who haven't finished reviews, We have a comment that is in reviewers that they have to state that they don't have a conflict of interest with a particular application that they are reviewing, so that there's a quality assurance there. And also the button to apply disappears after the deadline. Think of that. And people can't apply after the deadline, which is something that used to happen all the time, where we would say it was due, by this time, and we would see submissions, 2 to 12 hours after the deadline for people who did not get it in on time. So we're able to enforce the rules and enforce quality control a bit more closely and collect the things we needed effectively. We're able to do more support and coverage. So we have leads for the different competitions. We have a singular lead for limited submissions, but the several members of our team have duplicate coverage. So we know how to go into the system and look at another competition and be able to provide support when someone is able to take a trip, able to be out sick without feeling concerned that they are delaying progress on competitions. And so that redundancy is allowing us to continue to move forward with less risk of delay. We, again, as I said, reduce potential burnout of our staff because we can take things off their plate and share things and do things more supported by that system. We are able to quickly determine competition and review stats. We did this in particular all the time with our seed funding and our president's funding programs, where we looked at things as they were happening to get a scope in real time, what we were needing to do for the next stage in terms of getting people ready to be supported. And for some of our high interest limited submission programs where we know there's likely going to be a competition, we're able to see those things very quickly. We were also able to configure the competitions to support the various sorts of things that are needed. And so we don't use a particular template for everything. We use the template that makes sense based on the kind of thing they're doing, or we create one in real time. But the ability to do that has allowed us to continue to use the system and not make us have to do things because the system demands it to do it a certain way. In most cases, it has been very flexible and hasn't interfered with the way we want to run our processes here at the university. Next slide. Okay, I ran through a bit there, and I'm happy to begin addressing questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Josh. Really informative. It's wonderful to see all the different ways you've used the InfoReady platform to help with your processes in the Office of Research. And we do have some questions, so let's get started. The first one asks about the review panels. So the question is, I would love to know the back-end logistics of conducting panel reviews in InfoReady, in particular, sharing panel reviews with panel leads. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So a good recent example was in our the individual tracks of the President Initiative Fund. Each had their own panel, as I said, each had their own lead. And so the way we had established it, the back end for reviewers is the panelists could see all applications and individually provide scoring based on the review criteria and qualitative feedback by those things. We also had an additional step or stage that was set up. I think in InfoReady, the wording is step. And so I'll use that word, where we said there's the step where we have that, and we put everyone, including the chair, in that step, so they could see everything that was filled out and be acting as a reviewer as well. But then we had a separate step. InfoReady has a panel review option where you can set up a ranking. And so what we had when we created it was a space for specific qualitative feedback, and then a ranking of the proposals within the system. In parallel to that, we also drew out of the one of the tables that you can draw out of InfoReady is an Excel file for the competition showing the scoring for all applications. And so we were able to take that one of the tabs that's in the standard downloads that you can get from your reporting for an individual competition, and turn that into a pivot table that showed every application with the average reviewer total score and the individual score for each of the evaluation criteria. So you could see the scoring weighted for every average for everyone, but also each of the reviewers scoring. And with those things, we were able to have, they were able to have, I was a support function and not an active participant, but they were able to have a very thorough discussion going through the strengths and weaknesses of applications, and were able to have a remarkable consensus after going through them. And they, to their credit, in all cases, they went through every application and weighted it on its own merits.
Thanks, Josh.
Mm-hmm.
One quick comment for me about some functionality in InfoReady. There is the committee routing steps, which Josh referred to. The one cool feature there is that the default reviewers are able to send the committee packets in advance to committee members, so that those committee members don't have to go into a meeting, go into the system during a meeting. The default reviewer can enter in the committee's collective decision into the system. And those committee members will have the committee packet, which is the cover sheet of all the applications under consideration, a table of contents, and the individual application packets, which include the application form, file uploads, any reference letters, and past reviews. From an administrative perspective, that takes about 30 seconds to send. And if you've ever had to put any packet together in the past, it can take a long time. You don't have to do that any longer if you're using the committee routing step. So I just wanted to add that in there. And someone just asked whether we could share a link to instructions for using the panel and committee reviews. We'll be glad to do that after the webinar with you. Josh, another question. Could you elaborate a bit on how you use InfoReady for program evaluation in stats?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So with the report tab that we have available to us, we have a silver license, and which allows some of the features like single sign-on with our university and integration with ProQuest. But in the review tab that we're able to see as admins, we can pull the activity of all programs at a program level in terms of numbers of submissions over time. And I was just looking at this earlier today to get the names of the columns right. And what we're able to draw from these is things like, it says launch date, which would be the date, right, that it was posted in InfoReady and live, the internal submission deadline, notice of intent deadline, funding organization deadline. And then we're able to see with those, one of the questions that comes to our office is, or one of the complaints sometimes that you'll hear from people is, there's never enough time for limited submissions. And we can demonstrate how quickly we post things in reference to when it goes into, when it's posted. So we're able to assure that we're doing things as fast as possible and give as much time as possible following the competition, so that we can maximize the time for preparation after notices to proceed, because we take the comments seriously that it is important to do that. And so we're able to see, are we doing that as one factor? Are we being efficient with our limited submissions? Another important factor that you can see in the same report tab is you can see it's called potential awardees, actual awardees and applications. So, right, how many people could go, how many people were selected, how many people applied. And with that, you can see a metric of activity for the specific announcements that go in. And so you can see, are we hitting our limit? How often are we hitting the limit? And by what measure are we doing so? And so we're able to see those things and see, for ones that have a very high application to award ratio, are those run in a way that it would benefit from announcing it earlier or having changes to better support those things? And conversely, if there's a lower number, is there something that we can do to increase potential support of that? Our philosophy here is to post anything the university is eligible for as an institution, rather than curate it only by those that we would feel the university is eligible for. So there would be some low numbers inherent just because of that. But those are some things that we look at here. We also use it to evaluate and thank our reviewers for their support. And so we can see reviewers that are serving as reviewers that actually complete their reviews, and how often and for what programs to support we recognize them. We have done this annually. We're looking forward, when we're all back in a co-located status again, to thank our reviewers with something like a luncheon to thank them for their service on that. And similarly, we can see people that submit applications to limited submissions, and whether that gets followed through with an actual external submission, which is an important expectation. And so those would be some of the things on the limited submission side. With the internal programs, it is the application, the number of applications possible to show interest in the program. And that guides a lot of conversation in whether programs should be continued. If we're unfortunately having to leave great proposals unfunded by the program, whether we can have conversations about increasing funding, continuing it, or modifying it to share funding it in certain ways. So those are some of the things that I would say to that question.
Thanks, Josh. Really detailed. I think that you shared lots of great information there. So I have a follow-up question for you. This is coming from me based off of what you just said. Great proposals that didn't get selected, and you're trying to figure out how you can fund them. Are they ever eligible to come back next cycle or next year and reapply with the same proposal?
They can, yes. I mean, that's something that would be determined by our policy. But yes, absolutely. We would, even in those cases, we would use a separate posting of the competition. So they would do a new upload rather than a continuation of the same announcement. But they would be welcome to submit again. And we have something we've built into the template of all of our competitions. And that is, we specifically have a place for them to speak to the administrator about circumstances like resubmissions, if they've been having prior awards, if they have had correspondence with program officers, which is sometimes a determining significant factor, like, for example, with Department of Defense, that is something that would significantly strengthen a proposal, or have things that would not be in a white paper that would help to flesh out what they're trying to do. It's not a way to circumvent it. We don't let them attach anything, but we give them a space to specifically address that. And we consider those things in the next round. We also can use the proposals that are strong that we were unable to fund. We can hand that back over to the research development funding support side of the house and see, are we able to find alternate funding opportunities for those individuals that may or may not be limited for the future.
Great. And that's a great segue to some additional questions about limited submissions and finding funding opportunities. We have a few of those here. So first, this person writes, I'm interested to know how you manage the work of finding and promoting limited submissions, and how exactly the review is handled from finding reviewers and assigning them.
Sure. So I'll answer that in two parts, and you might have to remind me if I go too long on the first part. But a primary way that we use to identify limited submission is the Pivot ProQuest system. They specifically curate and identify funding opportunities that have institutional limits, which would be the purview of our limited submission program. And so we get a weekly alert from that system on everything that is limited. And then from that, we review those and put the ones that we are in fact eligible for after looking at the criteria, and put those into the system. Separately from that, there are cases where something is not in that system, or we are pre-announcing it because it is expected to be released in the future. And in those cases, we would do those manually as the information comes in from whatever source it comes in from. On the, can you remind me of the second part of that question? The reviewer?
Yeah,
side?
the second part was finding reviewers.
So that is a challenge. So we implemented something a long time ago that I would recommend to anyone who uses this system, and that is and every application, we have a required field where they put in research keywords. And we also have a required field where we say recommended internal reviewers. And so we get names and we get terms from people straight away. That is a huge aid in finding people that are supported. The university also has some systems internally that where we're able to find people who would match expertise area or what we need to support a particular program. But those two things have saved us a lot of time when we have high volume submission programs like the seed funding, for example, where there's people from across the university and a large amount of review required.
So you're managing different types of programs in the system and in your office. These reviewers, are they all coming from the same pool then? I know people are identifying some reviewers, but is it the same cohort of reviewers, or are you really segmenting them based off of subject area and what they've agreed to review?
It'll depend on the particular area, but the prevailing most of the time it is set up each time for that competition based on who would fit, not based on a standing panel or cohort. We have requested keywords and a non-binding commitment to serve if applicable from our faculty in the past. That can be helpful, but we also find a challenge in doing that is finding the person who's the best fit to speak to the technical aspects of the proposal. And so we will often basically have a cohort review every time for our limited submissions. Now for the internal programs that I mentioned, those often have standing panels that would be developed in coordination with unit leadership. And so we would have things like associate deans for research, senior researchers in the area. And at our university, we keep the reviewer identities. We know who they are, but we keep that information private to everyone else.
The system also keeps that private as well. Reviewer identities. There's Josh, one tip I've gotten from other admins that I don't know if you've ever employed this. At the end of the application form, the system allows you to put an acknowledgement statement of terms and conditions. And in part of those terms and conditions, they'll say something like, if you're selected to advance or if you're funded, you agree to be a reviewer at some point in the future.
That's a good idea. We've put that in, not in the form, but we've had that in the language of many of our internal programs and followed up on that when those subsequent rounds come. But I like the idea of putting that into the application form. We'll have to keep that in mind for the future.
Here's a question for you about, this is more operational with the system. And the question is, you mentioned setting up a standard template for each type of limited submission. Is the template for the letter of intent or for the review criteria or both?
Thank you. So for the short answer is pieces of both. So for the notice of intent feature, which again is not required, is optional, the notice of intent is a very simple piece of the application form. That's standard because our process is we collect that on the competition without any uploads. It's just a few fields of information. And then we push that application back to the person to resubmit to us with the full white paper when it comes to application. So that's standard. The notice of intent fields are standard. The application white paper is specific to the competition because we want to make sure it's as close as possible to what is going to be needed for the full submission if it's a limited submission. On the review side, as I mentioned earlier, the NSF review criteria is something that would go forward into anything that's related to NSF. But largely, we build the criteria based on what is stated in either the funding announcement or the agency criteria so that it is evaluated as closely as possible to how it would be evaluated if this were a full submission.
Here is another question about your notice of intent or letter of intent. How many of the notice of intents are going to full competition, especially now that you've adopted a platform to manage them?
A large number of people do it, and we've incentivized that. Since, again, we don't require it, it is a task for faculty members to have to complete it. And so it is an incentivized process because if they are the only person who submitted a notice of intent and then the white paper status, like it goes through the white paper deadline, and for some reason they weren't able to submit in time. Let's say their computer broke right before they submitted and they were the only person, they are the first person contacted after the close of the competition to see if they were in fact going to be submitted. And so that's a big part. And also we specifically remind people that the notice of intent piece, because part of what we collect are the reviewers and the keywords, is that this aids in the efficiency of review. So it is in everyone's best interest to make sure that this is done quickly. And I would say of the people who submit notices of intent, a majority of those will go forward to submit the full white paper. But of course, there are some times where people decide not to because they've joined a different team or they've decided to pursue a different opportunity.
Oh, thanks for sharing those additional details. One more question related to finding opportunities, and then gonna switch gears for the last few minutes. So this is a follow-up to the evaluation and stats question. Where does the metric of potential applicants come from? Is it the integration with Pivot?
It is, but it's something that's also native to InfoReady. So if you don't use that system or that integration, part of it is, I think in InfoReady, the language is maximum number of possible awardees. That is how that column gets populated with, this is how many could go, this is how many ended up applying, and how many were selected to be awarded from that pool.
Thanks, Josh. Now, it seems like UCF is investing a lot in the VPR seed grants. And so one question for you there is, what kind of follow-up reporting is UCF requiring to get an understanding of how the awarded groups or individuals are tracking?
In terms of progress management or final report downstream impact?
Both, really.
So we have a progress report deliverable that we use. The InfoReady has a deliverables functionality for awardees. And so we've built in a one-year progress report on our internal programs where they provide an update. A no-cost extension is standard in grants world. And so if they needed that, that's fine. But an update of their progress as it stands is something we've built into that. And the final report, we provide, not only did this benefit your research, but after this, we have a separate deliverable later that says the scope of this was to support whatever the specific scope was. And what are the metrics that help to demonstrate that this has occurred or has not yet occurred? And these are things like increased scholarship or teaming activities or submissions or awards that were received. So by what metrics can a person demonstrate the benefit of the program to them? And so those are collected and are reviewed and go into discussions for subsequent rounds to see if it should continue, grow, or be redirected to a different support.
Thanks for sharing that. You mentioned a few times about burden on the staff in the past. Since adopting InfoReady, how have you managed staff transitions or trained new admins into the system as they've come out on board?
So the person that was with us from the pre-InfoReady to the launch person moved on to a different job, but not because of burnout, but because it was something that she had wanted to do since before she worked with us. And so we were happy about that. And because we have a process in our team of redundant training in these systems, it was easy to build familiarity. We had brought in someone who was not a part of the team to specifically be supporting limited submissions. And so they were able to help with the onboarding and training, and the support of the team we were able to go through the steps and the processes, and so that they could have this without much of a problem. And they were able to, the person who took over in that transition was able to do so without too much of an issue and without too much of a delay, because everything was right there for them. And they also made use of some of the training that was online as well about the system in general and how it ran. And they started joining a quarterly meeting that we have with InfoReady to discuss questions about the system if needed, so that they could be a part of its quality control.
Well, it's great to hear. Yeah, I think it's important to have internal meetings like that so that everyone stays on the same page and any can get ahead of any issues that may be popping up.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard this multiple times. Everyone's saying, "Oh, we're adopting so much software. It's getting to be too much." So what are your general tips for rolling out new software, both to people on staff and then faculty and researchers as well?
So for rolling it out, I would say, especially in the beginning, keep notes in one place about what worked well. We used templates for a long time progressively so that we would inherit all of the good tweaks that we had and liked about the review process or about how things looked, so that at the beginning we were able to make sure we weren't having to reset every time. I think that's a big thing. And also make sure that you're comfortable with the system and who is using the system. And you can start with one thing and run it as a test program before launching others. We run most of our programs through this now and are continuing to add others into it. But we're doing this in a way where we know we can run a particular program through it. So I wouldn't say if you're new to the system, put 6 programs straight in and go crazy. I would say put a level that is appropriate for your team to run through it. Limited submissions went wholesale through it. But again, that was a unique case where it took us a while to get onboarded with that. And that's okay if there's some delays and adjustments. But make sure that your researchers who will be using the system are well aware of it. We did a number of trainings and have recordings and overviews of the system for faculty so that they know the portal exists and how to use it, and issues that people have that have been used for troubleshooting in the past.
Josh, we're coming up at the end of the hour, so there's a couple more questions, but we'll follow up with folks on those later. after the webinar. Josh, thank you so much for your time. It was a great presentation. Lots of good stuff following up in the Q&A. If you want to reach out to Josh, his contact information is on the screen here. And this will also be in the webinar link as well that we share. If you'd like to reach out to InfraReady with questions, my colleague Max Dinerman, his contact information is there. Mine is as well. I wish you would have used a picture from 10 years ago for me, but that's what it is right now. You can also contact the support inbox as well at support@infrareadycorp.com if you have technical questions. InfraReady also has a listserv. So if you are interested in being part of the listserv and connecting with other administrators or asking them questions about how they may be managing a process, feel free to sign up. I just posted a poll question if you'd like us to sign you up for it. We also have a referral program. So if you have a colleague at another institution that's not using InfraReady that may be interested in using InfraReady, you could refer them, and then both of you get a discount on a license year. So definitely something to look into. And then lastly, just a general thank you to everyone who attended. We really appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to join us with our Peer Spotlight webinar. I think Dr. Joshua Roney did a wonderful job today sharing everything they're doing at UCF. Lots of great successes. They're continuing to grow. I wish them really well with all that activity there. I know they're doing a wonderful job. Thanks everyone for your time. Have a great day.
Thank you.